All right. So we are looking at day one here of PFT 105. This is our first PowerPoint, our first sort of, we can call it a chapter. It's not really a chapter, but our first PowerPoint. Cellular metabolism, one of our big topics we're going to be talking about. So learning objectives today, stuff I want you guys to understand. I want you to understand what metabolism actually is accurately. A lot of people say, you hear the word metabolism, it's like, it's how many calories you burn. And that's actually not wrong, but it's only a small part of what our actual metabolism is. We also want to understand the two different components of metabolism, anabolism and catabolism. We need to understand what takes place in a very weird sounding word, which is an oxidation reduction reaction. We're never going to call it that ever again after today. Uh, we do want to understand how it works, and that way you guys can understand how easily energy is broken down. Understand a little bit of cellular respiration, which is basically how our cells are taking in oxygen and spitting out energy in the same way that you and I take in oxygen and spit out lots of energy. We want to understand how we use glycogen, how we produce it to store energy for later, how we break it down to make energy for now. And then also talk about fat, like we make fat because it's a really good storage form of energy, but at the same time, we're very good at burning it later down the line. And then lastly, we'll talk a little bit about like how chemical reactions are going to either build stuff up or break stuff down. That'll be hydrolysis and what we call dehydration synthesis. And then we'll get into our metabolic pathways after that. So that'll be really exciting as well. So today, our really big focus is understanding how we can take components of energy, break them down, and spit out lots and lots and lots of work. So just giving you a broad overview of everything. This is the if you forget everything I tell you today, you really just kind of remember the broad concepts. You need to create a whole bunch of different chemical reactions in your metabolism by breaking down nutrients and then using their components, right? So we all know, like, we see it on nutrition labels all the time, right? We all know we've got our three major macronutrients, right? We've got proteins, fats, and carbs. Those are the ones we're always lifting. When you hear about you're working out at the gym and somebody's like, yeah, you got to get your macros right. That's what they're talking about. They're talking about getting your protein intake to the right number, and your carb and your fat intake to the right levels, so that you can actually like reach your goals. Uh-oh, we lost somebody. Oh, did we lose Calvin? We did. All right, we'll get him back in a minute. Like that's really what we're kind of diving into, right? Your body is going to take carbohydrates and it's going to break it down into sugar, and then sugar is going to be used to produce energy and keep you moving. You're going to take proteins, you're going to break them down into their individual components. We call those amino acids. And amino acids are going to be used to make new new stuff. It's going to make enzymes, DNA, and obviously, probably the most important for us, it's going to make new muscle, which is great. And we got to break down fat. Fat is also a really good way to produce energy. In fact, the most energy you're going to find, or a larger amount of energy you're going to find, is in fat. Fat's got way more of it compared to carbohydrates. You're only getting about 4 calories worth of energy from a gram of carbohydrates. You get 9 calories of energy from a gram of fat. So fat's got a ton of energy trapped in it. So we love storing it. Maybe we love storing it a little bit too much, as our clients would tell us. That's a lot of times what they're, real worried about. So how do we take those components and break them down and spit out that energy? How do we get our energy needs to where we want to get them to? That's what we're going to be really talking about over the next 12 days. So basically, you take all of those components, break them down into individual pieces. Now you've got building blocks to build stuff up into stuff that we want to use. It's kind of like if like I am not particularly a let's see here. What's a real? I'm not a big Star Trek guy. So this is gonna be a weird example. Star Trek's not really my nerd genre of choice. I'm more of a Star Wars guy. You can see that is obviously very true. Star Wars is more my thing. So if somebody shipped me a Lego Star Trek, the Enterprise, right? The ship from Star Trek. I'd probably, yeah, I'd probably be like, that's cool. I'm not really into having an Enterprise laying around my house, and I'd probably break all those Lego pieces down and I might build them up into something that I think is a little bit cooler, like the Death Star, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's like up my nerd alley, you know? And so that's kind of what your body does, right? Your body can't use carbohydrates directly. They're too complicated, actually. They're way too complicated. Your body can't take a carbohydrate and directly use it for energy. But what it can do is it can take those carbohydrates, break them down into sugars, and then it can use those sugars to produce energy. Hey, Kelvin, welcome back.
Thank you.
I forgot to have my caps lock on. So that's what's really cool, right? Your body can take the component, big complicated structure, break it down into something a lot more simple, and then it can use the simple stuff, right? I can't take protein and directly use it to build muscle, but I can take protein and break it down into amino acids, and then I can use amino acids to build muscle, right? So that's what we're really kind of trying to get into today, right? So as your cells divide, that obviously takes energy, but they also need to have the materials to build new stuff. You got to feed your construction crew. Well, you also have to deliver some new lumber, and so we're constantly balancing how much energy is coming in versus how much energy is going out. We need energy to go out to move around and live our lives. We also need energy out to keep us alive, right? And so we're constantly just dealing with this energy balance. And you're going to hear me talk about energy balance for quite a while. That is going to be our big theme for the next pretty good chunk of this module here. So yeah, that is really the big part of what we're talking about today. So really quickly, I do want to I want to kind of break down. One of my favorite things to do is show some good visual aid videos here. Speaking of Star Wars, let's see here. Crash course metabolism. So I want to talk really briefly about how we actually make stuff. So this is actually a free course, not a free course, but it's a free series of videos that I really love showing in class because I find that they've got really helpful animations and they do a really good job of kind of breaking things down for us, so they make a lot of sense. I'll show some of these multiple times, so you'll kind of get used to seeing some of these things. But we're gonna go ahead and start off with this first one here, which is really just talking about how we're going to make stuff. That's going to give you some visual stuff for what I talk about for the rest of this lesson. So we'll go ahead and start off with this here. I'll make sure the sound share is on and close that, open it up. All right, here we go.
About 80 kilograms. I weigh about 80 kilograms. Most of that, let's say 64%, is water, though you can't tell by looking. I mean, as organisms go, I like to think that I look fairly solid. After water, the next largest proportion of me is protein, about 16%. Not just in my muscles, but also in things like the tiny sodium-potassium pumps in my neurons, and the hemoglobin in my blood, and the enzymes driving the chemical reactions in every one of my 37 trillion cells. And another 16% of me is fat, which I'm totally okay with. 4% of me is minerals, like the calcium and phosphorus in my bones and the iron in my blood, and 1% is carbohydrates, most of which is either being consumed as I talk to you or is sitting around as glycogen waiting to be used. But here's the thing, it's not like I just ate 80 kilograms of food and then all this happened. Instead, my body, like yours, is constantly acquiring stuff, extracting some of it to keep, burning some of it for energy, and getting rid of the rest. But even the stuff that my body does hold on to doesn't last forever. Some of the chemicals that I absorb in my food eventually become a part of me, but enzymes wear out and membranes break down and DNA DNA gets oxidized, so they get discarded. And then I need more of those chemicals to reconstruct the material that I've lost. As a result, over the course of my lifetime, my cells will synthesize somewhere between 225 and 450 kilograms of protein. That's like 3 or 4 or 5 separate me's just made of protein. And all the protein and fat and carbohydrates and nucleic acids that make up me, of course, come from food. Every organism has to keep taking in and breaking down food to keep resupplying itself with the raw materials it needs to survive. And all that activity requires energy, which we also gain from food. So how do our bodies actually convert what we eat into energy and raw materials? The answer is a never-ending series of reactions that are dedicated to doing two vital and totally contradictory things. One set of chemical reactions destroys the reactants that you give them, reducing big, complex substances into molecular rubble, and the other set reassembles that rubble into new and bigger products that are put together again to make you. So our bodies are constantly reinventing themselves in a perpetual state of loss, but also always rebuilding. And even though all of this is happening at the cellular level, its consequences could hardly be larger. These two sets of reactions are where everything that we've learned so far about the digestive, endocrine, circulatory, and respiratory systems really starts to come together. Together, these processes make up your metabolism. Now, the sciencey word metabolism has come to have a meaning in popular speech, but metabolism isn't just one thing. People talk about metabolism as meaning like how fast your body burns the fuel in your food or how high your personal energy level is, and that's fine for use by personal trainers and fitness magazines. But physiologically, metabolism really describes every single biochemical reaction that goes on in your body. And maybe more importantly, it reconciles two conflicting chemical processes that are always simultaneously underway inside of you. One of those chemical forces is anabolism. Anabolic reactions construct things and consume energy. These are the processes that take the small monomer building blocks in your food, like monosaccharides and fatty and amino acids, and build them into bigger, more complex polymers like carbs and fats and proteins that are used in your cells. Then, when you need new building blocks or you need to release some energy, those polymers in your body, or new ones in your food, get broken up by catabolic reactions. The processes of catabolism break down bigger molecules, and in breaking their bonds release the energy you need to stay warm and move around and provide your cells with fuel to build those polymers back up again. To be honest, your metabolism is a lot like Sisyphus. It works really hard, but it is never finished. And the boulder that your inner Sisyphus is always pushing uphill and watching fall back down, that's nutrients, the molecules that your body is forever breaking up and then rebuilding only to have them break apart again. And these nutrients, the materials that your body needs to build, maintain, and repair itself, come in 6 major groups. By volume, the majority of what we consume and what makes up our bodies is water, so that's maybe the most vital nutrient. Then there are vitamins, compounds that come in either fat-soluble or water-soluble forms. They aren't used as building blocks or for energy, but they're essential in helping the body make use of other nutrients that do those things. Vitamin C, for example, helps improve iron absorption, while vitamin K is crucial to blood clotting, and some B vitamins are important in the production of ATP from glucose. Minerals, like vitamins, don't provide fuel, but they have all sorts of other functions. Calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus harden bones and teeth, while iron is, of course, crucial in hemoglobin. Plus, potassium, sodium, and chlorine help maintain your body's pH balance and are used in action potentials. So water, vitamins, and minerals are all necessary. But the 3 major nutrients that everyone always talks about, the ones you find on food labels from oatmeal to Pop-Tarts, are carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. Most of the carbohydrates you've ever eaten, with the exception of lactose in milk, originally came from plants. Mono and disaccharides come from fruits, honey, sugar beets, and sugarcane, while polysaccharide starches come from veggies and grains. The main thing you need to know is that the monosaccharide glucose is the be-all, end-all molecular fuel that your cells need to make ATP. ATP being the molecule that your cells use to drive anabolic reactions when they need to make new polymers or get anything else done, whether that's operating a sodium-potassium pump or detaching the head of a myosin filament to contract a muscle. But ATP is too unstable to store, so cells often store energy in the form of glucose, which they can then catabolize and convert to ATP when they need it. Now, some of your cells can get their energy from fats, but many of the most important ones, like your neurons and red blood cells, feed exclusively on glucose, so most of the carbs that your intestines absorb are converted to glucose for that reason. But if it's not needed right away, that energy can also get stored as glycogen in your liver and muscles, or converted to glycerol and fatty acids to make triglyceride fats. And even though there seems to be some kind of marketing war going on against dietary fats, we most definitely need them. The fats in your adipose tissue store energy, of course, but they also store fat-soluble vitamins and cushion your organs. Lipids also form the myelin that insulates the neurons in your brain and throughout your body, as well as the oil in your skin, and they provide the vital calorie content found in breast milk. But there are other important lipids like cholesterol, which is the precursor to things like testosterone and estrogen, and of course phospholipids, which form the cell membrane in every single one of the 36 or so trillion cells you have. Now, if you're into eating meat, a lot of the fat you ingest might come from that, but guess what? Plants have fat too. Plants use lipids for energy storage just like we do, except they do it in fruits and nuts and seeds, which, when you think of it, are kind of like plant breast milk. It's food for their growing babies. Either way though, when you eat lipids, your body breaks down triglycerides into glycerol and fatty acids. Those molecules can then be processed and used in the making of ATP, or they might be converted into other kinds of fatty acids, which your cells can then reassemble into your very own triglycerides or phospholipids. And your liver happens to be great at converting one fatty acid into another, but there are some it just can't synthesize. For example, omega-6 and 3 fatty acids are called essential fatty acids because your body can't make them, so they have to be ingested. They get turned into all kinds of useful molecules like the ones used for synapse formation in the brain and for signaling inflammation during the healing process. But if carbohydrates provide energy and fats insulate and store energy, then just about everything else is done with proteins. They form the bulk of your muscle and connective tissue, but they're also what the ion channels and pumps are made of in your neurons and muscle cells, and they make up your enzymes, which are responsible for pretty much every chemical reaction in your body. In other words, your body runs on protein, and pretty much is protein. Nutritionally speaking, meats, dairy products, eggs, legumes, nuts, cereals are all particularly high in protein. But because everything we eat was once alive and every cell of every living thing contains protein, as long as you're eating whole foods, you're at least partially restocking your protein supplies. That might seem like you'd have to eat muscle to make muscle or eat enzymes to make enzymes, but that's not how it works. Since all your proteins are made up of just 20 amino acids, the differences between the thousands of unique proteins are simply in the sequence of those amino acids. And of course, you have a specialized molecule that knows just which amino acids to put together in what order to make a certain protein. It's called DNA. When you consume some hamburger, for example, the protein actin in the meat gets catabolized into its component amino acids, which gets mixed up with all of the amino acids from all the other proteins in the meat, like the collagen and elastin and titin and myosin, as well as all of the proteins from the bun and the tomato and the mayonnaise. Those amino acids then get reassembled using anabolic reactions into your very own but somewhat different proteins as defined by your DNA. Each cell is like a picky little Gordon Ramsay, and it has to have every amino acid needed, every ingredient present, before it will even think about starting to make a protein. And just like with your lipids, your cells can improvise and convert some amino acids into others if they're missing an ingredient. However, there are 9 essential amino acids that you cannot make from others and have to eat. Now, lots of foods don't provide every essential amino acid, but when you combine foods like beans and rice or pasta and cheese, you do get all of the essential amino acids, which is important because, remember, after water, you are mostly made of protein, on the order of 16%. But what about the 1% of you, the carbohydrates? How that tiniest fraction of you ends up creating all of the energy is what we'll discover next time. But for now, you've learned all about the vital nutrients, including water, vitamins, minerals, carbs, fats, and proteins, as well as how anabolic reactions build structures and require energy, while catabolic reactions tear things apart and release energy. And together, these competing forces form the wonderfully conflicted process known as metabolism. Thank you to our headmaster of learning, Linnea Boyev, and thanks to all of our Patreon patrons whose monthly contributions help make Crash Course possible, not only for themselves, but for everyone everywhere. If you like Crash Course and want to help us keep making videos like this, you can go to patreon.com/crashcourse. This episode was filmed in the Dr. Cheryl C. Kinney Crash Course studio. It was written by Kathleen Yale, edited by Blake DiPestino, and her consultant is Dr. Brandon Jackson. It was directed by Nicholas Jenkins, edited by Nicole Sweeney. Our sound designer is Michael Aranda, and the graphics team is Thought Cafe.
Okay. I always try to let the credits roll since we watch these videos for free. All right. He talks faster than I do. But hopefully you get to see some, like I said, I kind of like to start that off with some of those animations because it makes it a little bit easier to sort of visualize the things that I'm going to be talking about, right? So, like he talked about, your body is basically constantly breaking down material so that it can build them back up into you and me shaped stuff, you know? So when we say metabolism, right? It's not just how many calories you burn. It's not how much energy you have or how hyper you are. You know, our term for metabolism is going to be any and all chemical reactions that take place within the body. So when we say metabolism, what we mean is that, like, if there's a chemical reaction that takes place in your body, that's part of your metabolism, right? So for instance, if you had breakfast this morning, and in that breakfast you had a piece of, we'll say, like, I don't know, whole wheat toast or something like that, right? The second that that bread hits your tongue is obviously covered in taste buds and things like that, but it's also covered in spit. By the way, yeah, we're talking about nutrition this mod. It's gonna get gross. We get into the digestive system tomorrow, so that's real problematic. You know, your tongue is covered in spit, right? And so the second that you start like chewing up that toast, right? Spit is definitely much more than just water. We'll say saliva. Saliva is definitely much more than just like water in your mouth. What it really is a little bit of water mixed with all kinds of like really cool little enzymes and other chemical reactors, right? And so what an enzyme is it's actually a type of protein. So you've got these really cool little enzymes, and those enzymes kick off chemical reactions. So water as a chemical in general really likes to move between other molecules. It's just one of the things that water likes to do. We're going to talk about that a little bit later here. And so whenever you have like two molecules next to each other, water loves to be like, hey guys, what's up? And just push them apart, right? So but that doesn't always happen like directly naturally. You know, it doesn't always happen like very easily or quickly. You know, a lot, like, imagine if you took a piece of bread and just dropped it, you know, really flat side up on water. It would kind of sit up there at first until eventually that water took time to kind of work its way through all the molecules of bread, and then it would sink down and, you know, get all inflated and break apart and stuff and break down. But that would take that would take some time. If you had some enzymes in that water, though, it would happen way faster. Enzymes are basically in charge of making chemical reactions speed up a little bit. So your saliva has an enzyme called salivary amylase, which is a special enzyme that speeds up the reaction of digestion. So you actually start digesting the second anything hits your tongue, the second it's in your mouth. We call that a catabolic reaction. It's part of our metabolism. So if a metabolism is any chemical reaction, including just stuff breaking down in our spit, that would be a part of a catabolic reaction. Catabolic reactions are chemical reactions that break down complex things into their simple components, or complex molecules into smaller molecules. And when I say complex, you know, yeah, I do mean like, oh, that's complicated looking, but I also just mean big. You know, it takes something big and makes it small. That's what a catabolic reaction is. So when you take a big long chain of things, like you would see in like bread, so this big long chain of sugar molecules, and you broke it up into individual little pieces of tiny sugar molecules, you took something big, long, and complicated and split it up into a whole bunch of individual simple things. That's part of your metabolism. So that's a catabolic reaction. Now, here's the thing. We want to be able to use that sugar later, right? So you've broken down that bread and you swallow, it goes down into your digestive system, gets further broken down a little bit until eventually it's nothing but individual sugars. Can't be broken down any further than that. That's about as uncomplicated as we can make it, right? So once it's an individual sugar, it's going to pass into your bloodstream, and your body's going to be like, all right, well, I don't need to use this sugar for energy right now. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to reassemble it, and I'm going to make my own bread. Sounds weird. And no, it's not actually bread. But your body does make big, long, complicated chains of carbohydrates that we call glycogen. You can't really see glycogen very easily. It's kind of this wet, soupy carbohydrate mixture. But But I can show you something very similar to it. So you know when you're boiling potatoes or when you're boiling rice and there's all that like goopy stuff at the top, right? All that I call it scum. There's like potato scum at the top of the pan or at the top of the pot, right? You see it in rice as well. That is actually what happens is the extreme heat and the water, because water likes to work its way through things, is kind of breaking up some of the potatoes. And so the potatoes leaking out some of its sugars. And so those sugars are all floating to the top and they're kind of attaching themselves to other sugars, which is why if you you could probably like dip your spoon in there and pull it out and it would probably kind of link together. It would kind of hold itself together a little bit. That is kind of what glycogen looks like actually inside your body. So why does our body make this kind of scummy material? Well, because it's liquid, it can store itself in some of our organs really, really, really easily. So we can store it in our liver. We can store it in all of our muscles throughout our entire body. Your body will actually have, your muscles will actually have a lot of glycogen stored in them. And what's really great about that is, I'm not really using my glutes right now. I'm sitting here talking to you guys, but if I were to get up and start doing some squats or doing some sprints or lunges or whatever, right, I would really start using my muscles a lot. And so the more I use my muscles, the more energy they're going to need. And so if I've got glycogen nearby, remember that used to be a piece of bread, right? So it can break down this thing that it built back up into individual sugars. And I can use sugars directly for metabolic energy. And so I can break that sugar down, spit out a bunch of energy. And now suddenly my muscle cells are like, boom, we got fuel. Let's run up that hill, So let's look at how metabolism worked from start to finish with this piece of bread, right? I took it, put it on my mouth, started chewing, right? And so it started breaking those big, long, complicated chains down. That was the first part of metabolism. We call that catabolism. It's a catabolic reaction. Catabolism, catabolism, however you want to say it, right? It's breaking down the big complicated bread into simpler components. Then those individual components go into the rest of my digestive system. They get further broken down, even further of a catabolic reaction, until eventually there's nothing but individual sugars. Those individual sugars get into my bloodstream, take it over to my glutes, and then my glutes are like, great, I don't need this right now. We're sitting, he's talking about whatever. We're not really doing much work right now. So they actually anabolically build those sugars back up into something slightly more complicated, like glycogen, that wet, scummy, carbohydrate soupy mixture, right? And it'll live in my glutes for a little bit until later today I go for a run and then my body's like, all right, we're officially exercising. We need lots of energy. He hasn't eaten in a little while. Lucky for us, we've kept some energy stored around. So it starts breaking down glycogen again, catabolically. That allows me to break that down even further catabolically to release some energy and go on my run. Now, my body can also do this with fat as well. What would happen if, I broke down a ton of carbohydrates? Like, let's say it's not just a piece of bread. Let's say, I go to a brunch place and get 10 pancakes with lots and lots of syrup and fruit and all kinds of other stuff. You have chocolate pancakes, right? Sugar city population me, right? Well, now I've broken down so many carbohydrates. My body's like, dude, like we got it all in the body. It's all in the bloodstream, but like we do not have any place to put all this sugar. So you know what my body's going to do instead? My body's going to go, okay, great. Anabolically, instead of building it up to glycogen, we have no more room for glycogen. Anabolically, let's build it up into some fat molecules instead. So my body will take all that sugar and it'll convert it into triglycerides, which is actually what we find inside of our fat cells. And then it'll store those triglycerides in my fat cells. And that is how I've got long-term storage. So you can think of glycogen as your short-term storage, and you can think of your fat as your long-term storage. And we'll talk about like how we break those down later. But hopefully that gives you a pretty decent idea of how anabolic stuff works, that's building stuff up, and catabolic stuff works, that's breaking stuff down. Now, I already showed that video. Any questions so far, by the way? Let me make sure I'm been talking for a bit. Questions, comments, concerns? How's everybody feeling? Doing good? Oh,
doing good, Brad.
Love that. Everything's good. Cool. And by the way, that's another option for my new folks. You guys are always welcome to type out to me. You can just chime in and say, hey, that's super confusing. Don't understand that at all. Go back through it. I will always do that. But that's great. Okay, so anabolism, breaking this down. That's actually anabolism, building this up. Building up our understanding of anabolism. Like I said, it's the process of building a complex molecule from simpler molecules. So what's cool about this is like, this is how your body's going to make new muscle cells. This is how your body's going to make new glycogen. This is how your body's going to make new stuff in general, right? So how does it do it? Well, let's use a sugar molecule as an example here. I'm actually going to go ahead and copy my own slide here. And we'll go ahead and do this on Paint because it's a little easier to see. So what you'll notice here, if you look, we've got two individual sugar molecules, okay? And by the way, you're not going to have to necessarily work in molecules or anything like that. That's not what we're doing. But I do want to make sure that you guys kind of understand this a little bit more clearly here. So you can see this is one sugar molecule right here, okay? That's one sugar molecule. This is another sugar molecule, okay? Those are single sugar molecules. We actually have a term for that. We call that a mono, for the word meaning one, saccharide from the word meaning sugar. So one sugar. So here's the thing. These are both individual sugar molecules. We'll go ahead and just get this plus sign out of here. That doesn't necessarily exist, right? So I got one sugar molecule here on the right. I got another sugar molecule here on the left. They are identical, you know. But what you'll notice, I mean, you can see, right? Like, I'm just going to go ahead and move this over here. Look at how this molecule ends. See how it says OH over here? Let's do the same thing over here. Like, it's the same formula. They're identical, right? So I got an OH on this side, and I got an OH on this side. But then on the other side, I got an HO, okay? And it's just a slightly different arrangement. That's hydrogen and oxygen, by the way. Now, what are the components for water? H2O, right? Two hydrogens, so one hydrogen right there, another hydrogen right there, and one oxygen. That's what water actually is, H2O. So really, if you look at like H2O, what it actually is, it's H plus H plus O. That's actually what water really is at the end of the day. So what would happen if I took this H out of here? What if I pulled that away? So now there's no H. And I took another H out of there. And now there's no more H. So I lost a little bit of hydrogen. And then I'm going to take this O out of here as well. Well, I'd be left with an H plus an H plus an O. So I'm left with a water molecule. I pulled the water out of those two molecules. I got half the ingredients from this side. I got half the ingredients from the other side, right? So now what happens is, like, I've got two really unhappy molecules here. Both of these guys are like, we just lost all our water. That's super frustrating. So then what they do is they actually get attracted to one another and they link together. And so, bam, now I have got one big molecule here. This is not two individual molecules anymore. This is one big molecule. And I could just keep doing that. Look, there's an OH pairing over here, right? I could do the same thing. I pull this off and then I link a third one, fourth one, link another one, link another one, link another one, link another one, till eventually I've got this really big, complicated chain. If you guys have ever wondered, like, let's say you're making muffins, right? I'm picking a bad example because I don't know how to make muffins, but I think I know how to make muffins. You make all the muffin mix, right? All the batter and all that stuff, and you put it in the muffin tin, right? And you put that in the oven, and the extreme heat of the oven, you know what that does? It evaporates the water. All the water leaves. And so a little bit of the muffin goop from over here and a little bit of the muffin goop from over here, this loses some water and this loses some water, and it evaporates. And so then all of a sudden, this is unhappy and this is unhappy. So they link together. And that's why that goop eventually becomes like a solid, you know? Anybody in here make those protein muffins? I friggin' love those things. I get them. I get the ones at Trader Joe's. I love. You mix a little bit of water, a little bit of milk in there, and you just stir it up into goop, and you put it in your microwave for like 60 seconds, and you get a big protein muffin. Awesome. Yeah, I will be having one of those later today. True story. Uh, so like that is one of my favorite, and that's the thing. It's got a lot of water in it, and so we just evaporate the water out of those molecules, and what it does is it attracts the molecules together. So the way that your body makes new muscle tissue is it pulls the water out of here and it pulls the water out of there. They get attracted together, right? How does your body make new glycogen? It pulls the water out of a bit of sugar, pulls the water out of a little bit of sugar, and it gets linked together. That is how your metabolism makes new stuff. When you were a kid and you were growing, like your bones were getting longer and denser and all that, your body would take a little bit of calcium that was attached to a little bit of water, a little bit of calcium that was attached to a little bit of water, and pull the water out of it. And now calcium's left alone. So what calcium would do is like, great, well, I'm attracted to that other calcium over there. And it would link together and you would get a stiffer, harder bone. And that's how we grow. That's how we metabolize. This is why it's so important for us to eat new food, right? We get new food so we can break it down catabolically. Then our body will anabolically build it back up. And we're left with some extra water when we're done. And that is the process of, we call it dehydration synthesis, right? We take you can see in the PowerPoint, the way they've got it kind of drawn out here. Hopefully my drawing helps. But you look here, right? We got two individual molecules next to each other, and it's kind of highlighting the fact that there's the hydrogen and the hydrogen and oxygen here. So it pulls those out, and now you're left with nothing except a big empty space. And so then we have one big linked molecule and a little bit of water left over, right? And we can use that water to metabolize stuff later. We could use it to kick off other chemical reactions, or we could pee it out, you know? And that is basically how dehydration synthesis works, right? You dehydrate, you pull the water out of something in order to synthesize, which means to make something, right? You're synthesizing something. I play a lot of video games, and it's always about like, you got to synthesize the reaction or whatever, right? You dehydrate something to synthesize or make something else. Our textbook definition that we're going to see here, it's the process of building up complex molecules by dehydrating two separate simple molecules. That's how you guys make muscle. Now, here's the thing. You don't have to explain this to your clients. You honestly don't even necessarily have to think too much about this beyond, our regular nutrition class that we're going into eventually. But the reason this is helpful to understand is it really puts the emphasis on water and shows you how important it is to make sure that we are always balancing out our water. And we need to be able to create enzymes. Tells you why it's so important to have protein, right, in our diets. Proteins can be broken down into their components, and then they can be built up into so many different things. Proteins are amazing. You get so many different examples of proteins beyond just your muscle is protein, obviously, but in a muscle, I can think of 6 different proteins off the top of my head in one muscle cell. We've got DNA. You've got all of the different collagen in your skin. That's all protein. All kinds of different stuff. And so, we need to be able to make all these different ingredients, but we only get proteins, fats, and carbs. We got vitamins and minerals too. But like, that's not that many ingredients. We're working with 3 main components here, in order to make all of this different other stuff. So we need to be able to break stuff down catabolically in order to have the ingredients to build stuff up. So let's go ahead and finish up talking about making stuff here, right? So your cells are going to use dehydration synthesis to make all kinds of different things. It can make protein molecules as well. Now, these were sugars. You can't make protein from sugar. There just isn't the components necessary there. But you can make protein from amino acids, and that's what we get when we eat proteins. Now, take a look. This is actually the same exact thing that we just looked at here, right? Only instead of looking at 2 carbohydrates, now we're looking at 2 what we call amino acids. You guys have probably heard of amino acids, talking about nutrition before. We've also probably seen them for sale in like supplement stores. They sell BCAAs, or branched chain amino acids. And basically you need amino acids are what we get from proteins. What a protein really is, it's just a big, long, complicated chain of individual amino acids. So this is a little harder to see because they're just shaped differently. I can't use a square here, but this is one amino acid. And then this is another one. These are 2 individual amino acids, okay? So we got one on the left here, and we got one on the right here. Now, again, see how there's a little bit of hydrogen there, a little bit of hydrogen there, and a little bit of oxygen there. So if you pull them out, right, you're left with an H plus an H plus an O, aka H2, 2 H's, and an O. You're left with a water molecule. So if I suck the water out of this amino acid over here, and I suck the water out of this amino acid over here, what am I left with? I'm left with one double-chained amino acid. Now, I can't really do much with that either. This is really just meant to be an example for our lesson here. I can't do much with 2 amino acids linked together. But if I take all 20 of them, there's 20 amino acids out there, right? And they're all just going to have slightly different shapes. Let me show you, just pull up a picture here. You can see all the individual ones. They just look slightly different from one another. Oh, hey, Marielle, welcome back.
Sorry, my
bad. Okay, you're good. No problem. Actually, there we go. That's a good picture. See how they're all just slightly different shaped, guys? You don't need to have these memorized or anything. That's not going to do anything for you. But you can see they all just have a slightly different shape. These are the 20 ingredients that your body uses to make literally everything you've got in your body. So in our example here, we took 2 of them and linked them together. You would actually need to link all 20 together. But what's really cool is, what's the difference between a molecule of skin and a molecule of muscle is the order in which you link them together. So let's just assign, each of these amino acids that we're seeing here, we'll give them a letter, right? So we can see, we give this one the letter A, G, I, L, right? So you can give them all a letter. We'll simplify that and make it simpler. I don't know why scientists didn't do this, because they could have just used the regular alphabet. But they all got their own individual kind of unique letters here. But imagine if it was just, you got an A, a B, a C, a D, an E, an F, a G, H, I, J, K, right? And imagine how many different words you could make with just these letters, right? Think about how many different words you can make, even just these, and we got 20 of them. H, I don't know, L, E, U, R, S, T. There we go. That's 20, I think. So imagine how many words in a language you could make with just these letters: 3-letter words, 5-letter words, 20-letter words, whatever, right? You could just assemble all kinds of, your body can assemble all 20 amino acids in a million different variations. And that's why we have so many different types of proteins. We've got DNA, we've got enzymes, we got skin, muscle, hair, nails, all kinds of different stuff. All of our organs are made up of different proteins. How did it get those proteins? How did it make them? Well, it made them by taking individual amino acids and linking them together in different shapes. So we need to be able to dehydrate. That is all anabolism. That was all the anabolic stuff. That's all the building stuff. Now, obviously, we need to be able to break stuff down as well. So what if we did that whole dehydration synthesis thing in reverse, right? What if I had a big complicated molecule, and instead of sucking the water out to link something else together, what if I shoved water in and used it to break up some molecules? That's what a catabolic reaction does. So that process is called hydrolysis. Okay. Anytime you hear the word lysis, probably means that it's talking about like metabolism. So this is hydro, so water metabolism. Okay. So this involves the decomposition, breaking down, of molecules such as carbohydrates, lipids, those are fats, or proteins. And it splits them up by using a little bit of water. So what we're going to see here, actually, they don't show me they actually don't pull up they don't put a different picture in here, but I'm going to go ahead and just go back to our first one here. What we would do is exactly the opposite, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and take this molecule right here. Remember, we linked this all together, right? We linked this guy together. He's got his little extra oxygen there. And we have like an extra hydrogen over here. We got an extra hydrogen over here. And we got an extra oxygen over here, right? And they're just sitting around. You know, there's a little water molecule, right? How do I draw a water drop? Like this. Give it a little tail tap. There's a little water drop, right? So what if I took, you know, remember how we had this individual had a little OH over here, and this one had a little HO over here, right? So what would happen if I took this H and I just moved it and shoved it right over here, right? Just shoved it right on that side, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this molecule, let's move it right over here, and I'll take my happy little H, and I'll put it right there. And then I'll take this one, and I'll put it over here. And there we go. I have taken one big complicated molecule, and I put a little bit of water in between it, and that broke it up. And now I've got two separate individual sugars. Remember earlier I said I can use sugars to produce energy. So I stored a bunch of sugar in my glycogen, and I released that sugar by breaking it up, by actually shoving water in between. So now, not only do we need to be able to pull water out to make stuff, we also need to be able to shove water in order to break up stuff. That is how we have catabolism. And that's why water breaks up stuff when you leave it in a place for so long, you know? You put a piece of bread in water, eventually it all breaks down, you know? Even look at like a grain of sugar, right? You know, I think, you know, we look at a grain of sugar and it's like, oh, that's so small. It couldn't possibly get any smaller than that, but it can. If you were to look at it under a microscope, it would be a bunch of little individual sugars all tied together to make up one grain of sugar. You put that grain of sugar in some water and it dissolves. It's like, where did it go? It's still in there. It's just all individual pieces because water broke it all apart. That's how you get simple syrup. So yeah, that is sort of our process there, right? So hydrolysis splits stuff up. This is how our body kind of breaks everything down. So in the upcoming weeks, we're going to be talking about metabolism and food and things like that, right? So we need to be able to understand how food's going into our body, how we're breaking it down into individual components, and then we're using it, right? We use proteins, fats, and carbs. We use all of them for energy. Now, I will say, we like fats and carbs for energy. We try not to use proteins for energy as much as possible. If you do, there's some byproducts, a little bit hard on your liver and kidneys. Ideally, we're going to continually use carbohydrates for energy. Those are our body's favorite source of energy. It's our body's favorite source of energy because it's the fastest. And so, you know, you can bring carbs in and you get a big burst of energy really, really quickly. Makes it very easy for you to be very explosive and very athletic. It's one of the reasons why carbohydrate intake is a big part of athletics, right? It's why Gatorade and things like that. And Gatorade is like already pretty broken down, and it's meant to be. It's sugar water, you know, which is great if you are trying to instantly get energy to your muscle cells to keep you being athletic. We love fat because fat is like long-term energy. If I've got any keto folks in the room, right? I know if I do have some keto folks in the room, you might be thinking, I don't want to use sugar for energy. And you'll hear people on keto describe it as like, I just have so much more energy. And they do. You get a lot of energy on a keto diet, but you get a lot of like long sustained energy. It's not so good for big bursty energy. But it's really good for like long sustained bouts of energy. And that's why fat in your diet can leave you feeling full longer. You know, if you ever feel like really snacky, a handful of like nuts, even though they are very high in calories, will leave you feeling fuller a lot longer than a handful of M&Ms, you know? because that's mostly just sugar. Your body gets a big burst of energy and then immediately crashes. Get a little bit of fat in there and it slows it down because fats are a little bit harder to break down, which makes sense considering that we use water to break stuff down, and fat and water doesn't mix very well. So those are all of our chemical reactions, right? Now, not all of this happens supernaturally. It doesn't always happen easily, I should say. So we need to be able to control the speed of how fast we're either building up reactions or breaking down reactions, right? And so that's why we have all of these different materials in our body that kind of help us regulate how often we're doing that. So every cell you've got is creating either, these reactions we're talking about. Every single cell in your body is doing a little bit of dehydration synthesis to make new stuff for itself to keep itself alive, or it's using hydrolysis to break stuff down so that it can produce energy. If your cells can't produce energy, they can't keep themselves alive. This is one of the reasons why I hate to tell you, but zombie, I don't want to ruin the horror genre for you forever or anything like that, but zombies could never be a thing. At least not in the sense that like a dead body could reanimate. It just doesn't work that way because that body has lost the ability to produce energy. Therefore, it can't come back. Now, look up like something called cordyceps. Play the video game The Last of Us, like a fungus that takes over a living body. That's a wholly different conversation. That's very terrifying. But that could theoretically happen. But reanimating dead Frankenstein sadly can't be a thing. Because those cells have lost the ability to produce energy. They can no longer perform hydrolysis or dehydration synthesis. And without those two capabilities, you can't have an organism. So now we want things to speed up. We want to make sure that these chemical reactions that we've been talking about are easy. We want it to be easy for water to shove itself between a molecule. We want it to be easy for water to pull itself out of a molecule. So we actually have special proteins that we make called enzymes that speed up this process. Enzymes are actually an example of a protein. Your body would assemble amino acids earlier. It would make it would take all these simple amino acids. It would use dehydration synthesis to make an enzyme, okay? And enzymes help you speed up your reactions, like I said, right? So the saliva, right? Earlier I said salivary amylase, right? That's an enzyme in your spit that helps you digest stuff a little bit quicker. Your stomach acid, yeah, it is very much acid, but it also has a lot of enzymes in it. And weirdly, the acid doesn't do most of the heavy lifting when it comes to breaking food down. I remember thinking like, oh, I use acid to break down foods. You do a little bit, but honestly, your stomach acid is really much more part of your immune system than anything. It's really just there to kill any bacteria or viruses or any other critters that happen to get into your food. The breaking down stuff, it does a little bit, but honestly, what your stomach acid mostly does when it comes to breaking stuff down, it uses enzymes. It's got proteins in the stomach acid that actually make it really good at breaking stuff down. So think of enzymes like this, guys, and I use this example all the time. Your enzymes are like the key to your car. Like they don't have any energy of their own. Like your car doesn't run on the key, right? It runs on gasoline or diesel or whatever you're using, right? Or I guess battery power. Your car runs on all that, right? But the key is what kicks off the ability to use that gasoline or diesel or electricity, right? You put the key in the ignition and you turn it. That's what actually unlocks the ability to use all that stuff. That's kind of what enzymes are. They don't have any energy of their own, but they speed up our ability to use energy. So they kick off our chemical reactions. And that's actually why I didn't come up with that example. We call that working in a lock and key mechanism. So the ability to do work takes a lot of energy, right? So we need to be able to break down plant matter, animal matter, whatever, right? We need to be able to break that down into individual components so we can use those components to produce energy. And that's the main reason we're talking about all this, right? So how do you release energy? Well, energy is always going to be released, guys. This is just a general rule of chemistry. Energy will always be released when you break the bonds between molecules. I mean, honestly, earlier, what's kind of funny about hydrolysis, right? Remember hydrolysis, we shoved in a little bit of water here and we split up these molecules. Just doing this, breaking that off, it actually releases a little bit of energy. Just a little bit, not a ton. This is a pretty weak bond. The stronger the bond, the more energy is going to be released. So anytime you take two molecules, break them apart, energy is going to get released. In the same way that I'm looking around, I don't have anything to break. No, yeah, I have anything to break really. In the same way that if you took a stick and you snapped it in half, right? It was all a bunch of stuff linked together, and then you broke it apart. And so you hear that cracking sound when you break the stick. That's energy getting released. It's not a ton of energy, but it's a little bit, So anytime you break apart molecules, energy is going to get released. So that's part of what we're going to do. We're actually going to purposefully make anabolically a high energy molecule. And then that high energy molecule is going to be able to be broken in half. And when we break that molecule, it'll release a ton of energy. That's what's going to power our body and allow us to do stuff. So when a substance is burned, its energy is released. Usually, usually as light or heat or sound. Somebody found the marker feature on their phone. If you figure out how to erase that, because I don't think I can do it on my end, that would be awesome. But for now, we'll go ahead and we got a little blue line on there. So yeah, whenever we break the molecules of something, a little bit of energy is released. Usually it's light. A lot of times it's heat. That's actually why burning logs releases a bunch of energy. Oh, don't even sweat it. Yeah, it inevitably happens in the beginning of the mod every time. Hey, there we go. So when we take glucose, sugar, right? When we take sugar and we break it down, it releases a bunch of energy. And that's actually what powers all of our cells. So that is where we're going to talk about what we call cellular respiration. Uh-oh, we just lost somebody. Who did I lose? I can't tell. I gotta have it memorized. I gotta have the whole room memorized. Oh God, I lost two people. So cellular respiration, right? Cellular respiration is the process of putting energy ingredients into a cell and spitting out energy itself, right? So taking small components and spitting out energy. So we've got three processes for how we're going to do this. And we're going to watch just a really quick video here that's going to explain how that works. Let's see if I can get those two people back in the room. Hey, there's Mariella. Okay, where are you? There it is. All right, this is a word. This is a little bit more of a simple video that I also like. This is going to explain cellular respiration in a nutshell, and then we're going to wrap up with that today. So let's see here. We lost Max. Okay. All right. Maximize that. Some of you guys have seen this video before, but it's just a really good animated video to show how this works.
ATP. We love it. You'll find ATP in so much of our science art. Whether it's a GIF of a mitochondrion or cell transport, or a comic about cellular respiration or fermentation, you'll see ATP mentioned. So why the big deal? Why is it all over the place? Many times students will get it in their mind that it is an energy currency of some kind. When I first started studying biology, I noticed that in textbooks, it's often represented like this starburst thing or thunderbolt. And, I guess in my mind I imagined it was like some big blast of energy that helped the cell do things. And by do things, I mean that we need ATP to do many cellular processes. Examples include active transport, such as when a cell is trying to move something against its concentration gradient, or its role in muscle contraction with the actin and myosin cross-bridge. We need another video for that. ATP is critical for many types of cell signaling. You need your cells to be able to communicate. Those are all just some examples. But what is ATP? How do we get it? And how does it work? Those are the basics of what we're going to focus on in this short video. So what is ATP? If you remember the 4 major biomolecules, ATP would fit in with nucleic acids. Yes, like DNA and RNA. ATP is a nucleotide derivative, so it has those 3 parts you'd see in DNA or RNA nucleotides: phosphate, sugar, base. But it actually has 3 phosphates. ATP is short for its full name, adenosine triphosphate. This fancy name is helpful as it tells you that it contains the nitrogenous base known as adenine and 3 phosphates, hence the tri in adenosine triphosphate. Its sugar is ribose. How do you get ATP? All cells need ATP, and so they need processes that can be used to generate it. But the process can differ. It might involve oxygen, such as aerobic cellular respiration. It might not involve oxygen, such as anaerobic respiration or fermentation. During cellular respiration, plants break down the glucose they made from photosynthesis to make ATP. During cellular respiration, animals break down the glucose they consumed to make ATP. And it's not just plants and animals. Bacteria, fungi, protists, and archaea, they all need to make ATP. We have a video on cellular respiration and another one on fermentation that can be helpful to understand the process. But one thing that we do want to mention about making ATP is it's important to understand it is part of a cycle. With the ATP cycle, you have ATP, which can be hydrolyzed, releasing energy and losing one of its phosphates in this process. A process like cellular respiration can provide the energy needed to add a phosphate to ADP in order to regenerate ATP again, which is important as ATP can be used quickly. This brings us to how ATP is able to work. So how does ATP work? It's not just about ATP being hydrolyzed and releasing energy, it's more than that. Okay, honestly, it's more than our short video can go into, which is why we provide some further reading links, but let's look at some basics. So when ATP is hydrolyzed, meaning here it involves the addition of water, it's not really that the bond between the second and third phosphate itself is a super strong bond. It's actually more that the bond between the second and third phosphate contributes to this ATP being unstable. These phosphates with their negative charges don't like being arranged like this. The change from ATP, losing its third phosphate, to become the more stable ADP is an exergonic reaction and releases free energy. A popular example for understanding ATP is to use the spring illustration, like a wire spring. Consider how you might compress the spring. ATP would be modeled by that compressed spring, and then you would let it go until it just goes into this relaxed state, which would be represented by ADP. When ATP is hydrolyzed, if the energy was just released, it will likely not be useful for a cell if it's not actually coupled to something that needs it. Thankfully, the energy release can be coupled to endergonic processes that the cell needs to do. This can occur when the phosphate from the ATP is transferred to a molecule that is going to be acted upon. For example, this cell transport protein here is supposed to move some kind of molecule against its concentration gradient. Recall that if it was passive transport, these molecules would be moving from high to low concentration. But in active transport, thanks to ATP, this protein can move them against the gradient. When the phosphate is transferred to this protein, we say the protein has been phosphorylated. Sounds powerful. We can say in our example that this protein is more reactive and less stable in this form, this phosphorylated intermediate state. When it reverts into its original, more stable shape, it can assist in moving them the other direction. So, from marveling at the beating of a single cilia hair, or chromosomes being separated in cell division, or binding the correct amino acid on a tRNA, I could go on. We hope that little ATP symbol will mean something every time you see it. Well, That's it for the Amoeba Sisters, and we remind you to stay curious.
Okay. So the way that works is that's what we're doing. When I say, I've been saying energy all day, right? We're breaking down this to get energy. We're breaking down that to get energy. What I mean is we are producing energy. We're producing ATP molecules. So ATP looks something kind of like this. It kind of drew it in the video there. I'm going to draw a slightly different version, a little bit more simplified, right? So you'll have you'll have a big molecule of what we call adenosine here. Right? That's the A in ATP that I keep referring to. And that's this right here. Let's make that one bigger. So there's our adenosine. And then you're going to see 3 phosphates, right? That's the P that I'm referring to. So because there's 3 of them, we say triphosphate. So adenosine triphosphate. So we're going to have one there. We're going to put another one there. And we'll put another one there. So this is what ATP kind of looks like, right? It's a molecule of adenosine and 3 little phosphates, all attached together, right? And they don't necessarily love being attached together. I just realized I can just copy that. That would be much easier. They don't necessarily love being arranged like this. In fact, there's a lot of energy trapped between these bonds. And so there's going to be a line there and there and there. And they're all attached. And what we're going to do is we're going to break off this 3rd phosphate. We're going to take this one right here. We're going to kick it off of the end. And what that's going to do is it's going to release a whole bunch of energy, right? And when we do that and all that energy gets released, that's what powers our cells. So I took something complicated, like an ATP molecule, and I broke it down by kicking off that 3rd phosphate. Now I'm left with an A, we call it an ADP, adenosine diphosphate, di for 2, tri for 3. So I break down that ATP into ADP, and all of this energy right here, I'm going to scoop that all up, and I'm going to power my cells with it. That's what's going to allow me to do literally everything that I do. Everything that you do every single day takes energy, and that is how we do it. So we've got some enzymes that help us kick off this ATP reaction, but a lot of it can happen pretty passively when a component within a cell needs energy in order to do something. It'll actually use an ATP molecule and break that down. So now we need to understand, how do we get this ATP? Like, remember, we had proteins, fats, and carbs, right? And we broke them down into individual components. How do we get them broken down into ATP? Well, that's what the process of cellular respiration actually is. So there's going to be 3 parts to cellular respiration. If you imagine like your classic kind of cell here, why does it keep opening like that? That's driving me crazy. If you imagine kind of your classic, sort of high school biology cell, looks something kind of like this, got a nucleus inside, maybe, some other organelles, we'll just go ahead and put some random shapes in here. These little organelles inside here doing all kinds of different things, right? One of the most important ones you're going to see is this one. You're going to see, a little shape kind of like a little oval with some squiggly lines in it. That right there is what we refer to as the mitochondria. And so the mitochondria, we'll see a couple of these here, and I'll put one more of them in there. We'll go ahead and fill those up just to kind of highlight them. There we go. Now we got some mitochondria. So actually, you know what? Let's use a different color. Let's use orange here. So there's our mitochondria, right? Now, inside of all your cells as well, this empty space in the middle, it's actually not empty. It's a fluid. All of your cells have a lot of fluid in it. So we can produce energy in 2 places inside of our cells. We can produce energy here inside the fluid, right? This is what we call our cytoplasm or cytosol. The fluid is called cytosol. When it's filled with stuff like that, with all the little pieces of stuff, we call it cytoplasm. So that's what we're going to do there. And then this is where we do glycolysis, right? So glycolysis takes place inside of our cytoplasm. Oh boy. Glycolysis takes place inside the cytoplasm, right? But then we can also produce energy. You guys remember probably from high school, these little guys right here. Every high school teacher has to say this. There's our mitochondria. That's the powerhouse of the cell, right? So there's your mitochondria, and that is where we are doing aerobic metabolism. So aerobic metabolism spits out a lot more energy. Here's what I kind of hate about the whole drives me a little crazy about the whole high school approach to like mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. I know that that's like every teacher ever has like said that. My problem with that is like, to be fair, the fluid, the cytosol is also the powerhouse of the cell. You're also producing energy in here. However, you do get a lot more energy in the mitochondria. You get a lot of energy in there. You get about 2 molecules of ATP's worth of energy in the cytosol, and you get about 38 molecules of ATP worth of energy in the mitochondria. So that's why the mitochondria is the powerhouse. It creates a ton of energy. So the 3 ways that we are going to produce energy through, we call it cellular respiration. This is describing how our cells take in energy. First one's glycolysis. Basically, a little bit of sugar works its way into this fluid. A little bit of sugar works its way. I can't click apparently. I just have no accuracy right now. A little bit of sugar gets into this fluid here, right? A little bit of glucose goes into here, and glycolysis takes place and spits out a bunch of energy, right? So if I were to say like sugar goes in, we'll say glucose, right? Goes in here. Well, out here, you're going to get ATP. Okay. But you are also going to get a byproduct. Here's the big thing about glycolysis, guys. You get ATP, but you also get lactic acid as a byproduct. Now, I know all of us in here probably don't like lactic acid. You know, it's what we all think of when we think of our muscles burning. And that's a good way to think about it. But we actually love lactic acid because here's the thing. Lactic acid is going to go into the mitochondria along with a little bit of oxygen. So I'm going to put some oxygen up here. And that's also going to go into the mitochondria. Okay. And with a little bit of oxygen and a little bit of lactic acid, out comes a whole bunch of ATP. In fact, that's how we get the 38 molecules. So your body's kind of recycling here. Now, there are some byproducts there as well. You get a little bit of CO2. That's what you exhale, right? CO2. And you do get a little bit of extra leftover water because it dehydrated synthesized in order to do this. So you were left with some leftover water. So those are the ingredients, right? But the big ones that we want to pay attention to, the ones that we care about, are the ATP, right? The energy. So that's what we're really excited about through this process. So going back to my PowerPoint here, you can see cellular respiration describes all of this happening. Every cell you've got has got some fluid in it, so it can do some glycolysis. Glycolysis we call an, that should say anaerobic. It's an anaerobic reaction, meaning that it takes place without oxygen. And it uses sugar to produce ATP in the fluid portion of our cell. So it produces energy right in here. Now, it did also make lactic acid as a byproduct, okay? And so with that extra lactic acid, it's going to take that lactic acid and add a little bit of extra oxygen to it. And then in the mitochondria, that's where that's all going to move, right? The lactic acid came in here. Lactic acid goes in to the mitochondria right here, as well as a little bit of oxygen, right? And all of that is going to spit out 36 to 38, depending on who you ask, molecules of ATP, tons and tons and tons and tons of energy. And it does it through these two processes here. One is called the Krebs cycle. That's what actually uses the lactic acid directly. And one is called the electron transport chain. That's the remainder, everything that's left after the Krebs cycle. So you look at this and it's like your body is just the most effective recycling plant you've ever seen, right? Let's go all the way back to my toast analogy from the beginning of this lesson, right? We take a slice of toast, we break it down into individual sugars. Those individual sugars go into our cell. And in the fluid portion of our cell, they become a little bit of energy that allows our cell to live. And they also become a little bit of lactic acid. And that lactic acid then gets combined with a little bit of oxygen to become even more energy, right? And that's what really allows our cell to live. Now I can do a lot of energy. So now you understand, like, we actually kind of like lactic acid as long as we don't make too much of it. When we make too much of it and our body can't convert any more of it, it builds up. And that's what makes our muscles burn like crazy. So that's kind of how our process works. So the next thing that'll happen after glycolysis is what we call the citric acid cycle, or the Krebs cycle. It's named after the guy who sort of discovered it, right? And this is an aerobic reaction, meaning it does actually use oxygen. So we bring in a little bit of extra oxygen and we use the byproducts, right? Remember, glycolysis took in glucose, spit out energy, and then as a byproduct, it also on the side made lactic acid. We're going to use that byproduct. We're going to recycle it, right? And we're going to use it in the citric acid cycle. Looks something kind of like this. You can see here, really, really, really complicated, right? There's our glucose. There's where it becomes energy right in here. And then it goes to the citric acid cycle. I use all these little enzymes. These are all enzymes, by the way. In fact, I'll talk about this later. These are all B vitamins. These are what your B vitamins are actually allowing. They're acting as enzymes. And you can see they spit out a little bit of ATP. But what they really spit out a lot of, see all these NADs and FADs, NAD, 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 FAD, FAD, right? All those NADs and FADs, those are the byproducts. So the citric acid cycle is kind of similar to the glycolysis in a lot of ways, right? You took in an ingredient, which was in this case lactic acid and oxygen, and you spit out a product, which was ATP, but you also made some waste products. The waste products in this count were NAD and FAD. But here's the thing, your body, again, really efficient recycling plant. So that's where we go through the electron transport chain. Your body takes the NAD and it takes the FAD, squeezes it all together through these carrier molecules, uses a little bit more oxygen, takes even more oxygen to make this happen. And it squeezes it through this little pump right here. It's this little pump, right? That's the NAD and the FAD right there. These little circles, those little hydrogen ions. And they go through this little pump, get circled around through these little things, and spit out a ton of ATP. So when I say you get 38 to 36 molecules, nobody can agree on how this works. We're still studying this stuff. We've only understood this for a couple decades at this point. But basically, you get 2 ATP from glycolysis, you get 2 ATP from the Krebs cycle, and you get about 36 molecules of ATP through squeezing all those byproducts together. Now, by this point, you got nothing left. We can't do any more recycling. All we're left with is extra water, extra H2O. So we're just going to spit that out of the cell. And we're left with a little bit of CO2. We're going to spit that out of the cell. And then it's eventually going to work its way to our lungs. And we're going to get rid of it. And that's actually what happens to your carbohydrates. Your carbohydrates get broken down in glycolysis. And they become energy. But they also become lactic acid. That lactic acid gets broken down in the Krebs cycle. And it becomes energy. And you get a bunch of NAD and FAD. And then the NAD and FAD go into the electron transport chain. And they get broken down into a massive amount of energy. And then you're left over with nothing more than a little bit of CO2 and a little bit of water. And your body can use the water, but we got to get rid of the CO2. You got to breathe that out. So when you eat a donut, right, the sugars in that donut, big, complicated, really big, complicated thing, right? They get broken down into individual sugars. Those individual sugars work their way over to a cell. In the fluid of the cell, they become 2 molecules of energy to keep the cell alive. Then they also become a little bit of lactic acid. The lactic acid goes into the mitochondria, becomes a little bit more energy in order to keep the process going. And it becomes a bunch of little byproducts that's the fat. Then it goes into the further end of the mitochondria and becomes a ton of energy. And then all that energy gets spit into the cell, and your cell's like, let's friggin' go. This is awesome. And you get like a sugar high. And you're sitting there like, now I got lots of energy, right? And you want to go for a run. And this is why it's so important to make sure that we're fueling ourselves. Now, I know I spent most of the day kind of talking about carbohydrates. And that is going to be a big part of our conversation in this course in particular, because carbohydrates are our body's favorite source of energy. You can see just how much energy we got from those carbohydrates. But I do want to make it clear, you can actually skip glycolysis. What if you do not have sufficient glucose in the body? Well, remember earlier I told you we can use fats for energy? Well, I'll just skip this process and go straight over to here in the mitochondria. If anybody in here in the call right now, if you're a keto person, that's what you do. You're a big user of the mitochondria, which spits out the most energy, and you're skipping glycolysis. But here's the thing. We have to remember, and I'll talk more about this later, glycolysis happens fast. The mitochondria happens really slow. So while I am not anti-keto, I don't like keto diets when it comes to explosive athletes who need big bursts of energy to work really hard in a very short period of time. I don't like keto for sprinting. And I don't like it for mid-distance running. And I don't really particularly like it for weightlifting either. But if you had somebody who's living like long distance running, like marathoning or something like that, at a very low intensity, or if they're just living an everyday life where, yeah, maybe they exercise, but they're not exercising at a particularly high intensity, that actually isn't so bad, because the aerobic metabolism spits out a lot of energy. It just does it very slowly. So it's almost like getting paid in $1 bills really, really, really quickly is what glycolysis is like. And you just get a ton of dollar bills, right? Whereas the aerobic metabolism, everything in the mitochondria, it's kind of like getting a $20 bill every now and then, a little bit more slowly. Right? They both make a ton of energy, but one of them does it very explosively, and one of them does it very consistently and slowly. And that's what we're going to be talking about for the rest of this class. We're going to look at the difference between high repetitions and low repetitions, long rest periods and short rest periods. We're going to be looking at how our body takes in all of this energy and spits out its ability to do stuff. But hopefully today you got a really good understanding of how we take all of this big complicated stuff, break it down, and then we build it back up into stuff that we can use directly, right? So summarizing everything up, chemical reactions stores and uses energy in order to maintain our body's ability to do all of our essential functions, right? You've got your anabolic reactions, which is building stuff up, making ATP, for instance, like making a new molecule is a really good example of that, or making a new muscle cell, or making glycogen so that we can use that energy later. All of those are examples of anabolic build-it up reactions. But we also have breaking down reactions, right? We've got cellular respiration, where we take something really complicated and we break it apart to make ATP. Then we break ATP down even further. Glycolysis, right? That's how we make ATP molecules in the fluid of our cells. The citric acid cycle and the electron transport chain, those are both taking place in our little air bubbles, little mitochondria air bubbles here that hold on, bring in a little bit of oxygen and then take all the byproducts of this stuff to make even more energy, right? And spit out lots and lots of ATP molecules. And ATP is what allows us to move. It's what allows us to breathe, right? And all of that. So we can do that with fats. we have to skip glycolysis. We can't use fats in glycolysis. We can use it in the mitochondria though. And what about proteins? I didn't even talk about proteins for energy because honestly, we don't want to use protein for energy. We want to use protein to build muscle, right? We don't want to burn up our protein for energy purposes. But if you have to, your body can take protein. It can take an amino acid and it can rip out its skeleton. Sounds really violent because it is. It's like a Mortal Kombat fatality. You take out your amino acids have a nitrogen skeleton, rip it out of there, you're left with all the ingredients for a molecule of sugar. So what your body will do is it will convert protein into carbohydrates, and then it will use those carbohydrates to do exactly what we described earlier. It goes through the regular old process of energy production. So, big complicated chemistry stuff today. We're going to be reviewing the heck out of this stuff, talking about it over and over and over and over and over again. So if you didn't feel like you got a full dose, we are definitely going to continue talking about it. Yes, what's up? Question, Marielle, what you got?
Yes. Are we looking at a specific chapter on the NASA?
So this is a little bit more complicated. This is going to be a little bit more complicated than you're going to find in your regular NASM. So this is not directly in your textbook. It kind of is. You can find a little bit of this stuff, but it's going to be muddled with more complicated topics. So I don't tell people to read it. You can check chapter 8 of your textbook, but it's going to go way more in depth in that chapter than I like you to. So what I would recommend instead is if you look at your Memler's textbook. Do you remember this one, the Memler's textbook? It's in your bag. I can't remember which one it looks like. It looks either, I think this is the cover you guys have right now, or it might be this one. They changed the gosh darn cover on this book so often it drives me crazy.
Yeah, I've seen that. I kind of read a little bit of it.
Yeah. So if you open up that one, I think it's chapter 17. Let me check. I just need to find the table of contents. This is what we're going to get into next mod. Next mod, we use this book every day. That's not helpful. Let's try. There we go. Chapter 20. That was close. Check chapter 20 of your Memlers, Marielle. If you guys want to read directly on what we talked about today, you can check chapter 20. However, I really don't think you need to. If you review these PowerPoints and these notes, it'll do most of the work for you. It's meant to kind of be self-contained. We will reference chapter 20 directly next module. But if you want to go in there, I think it can be super helpful for you. I know you love to follow up on the chapters. So chapter 20 of the Memlers. Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys. My new folks, how you feel? Sam, Panuka, Kelvin, Israel, and Andrea. How you guys feeling?
Pretty good. A lot of information, but good.
It is a lot.
It's actually kind of a recap because I did this right out of the Marine Corps. I went personal training, did this, and so it's kind of like I know what you're talking about and everything, but still kind of a lot. But good. It's good stuff.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff. Like I said, this is one of the classes that kind of intimidates people coming in. I know some of this stuff is like really technical. Trust me, guys, in a couple days, you're going to get into the rhythm. And my other students who are in here can tell you, we revisit this information very circularly. You're going to hear me say all this stuff over and 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 over.
There's a point to all of this, basically.
Yeah.
To everything he's saying within like 3 months that you're in.
Yeah. So
Yeah, if you have deer in the headlights, look now. It'll get better.
it really will. And
Promise, it will get better.
yeah, and it's always really scary coming in on the first day. But
Tell me about it, man.
yeah, right. Especially if you're coming in late. Yeah, you Benita, for you guys don't know, came in like what, you were on like day 5.
Day 5.
That was rough. Day 5 days were so tough. But yeah, good, yeah. So yeah, if this is your first time studying biology and stuff, it's a little heavy at first, but it really starts to all kind of come together. We didn't get into many examples of how it actually, like, we use all this info yet. And we're gonna get into that on like day 3, and then you'll be like, oh, that's why this is important. Got it. Like, and it'll really start clicking the further we get into this course. But before I let you all out of here, wrapped up today. Any questions or comments?
Nope.
Cool. All useful. Everybody feeling good. All right, let me kill the recording here.